My daughter chose her stepmom. Over me in court, I showed the abuse videos. My mother-in-law called ICE to get me deported. I was born in Texas. Go back to your country, you illegal piece of trash. I'm calling immigration right now. Those were the words that came out of my mother-in-law's mouth as she stood in my own living room, pointing her bony finger at me like I was some kind of criminal. My name is Monica Rivera. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a senior compliance officer for First National Bank in Houston, Texas. What made her words particularly absurd was the fact that I was born at Methodist Hospital right here in Houston, just like my father and grandfather before him. But Isabella Martinez, my husband's mother, had decided that my brown skin and Spanish surname automatically made me deportable. I didn't yell back. I didn't argue. I simply stood there, watching this 67-year-old woman dial what I assumed was ICE, speaking broken English mixed with Spanish, as she reported an illegal immigrant living at my address. What she didn't know was that my phone was recording everything and that my calm demeanor wasn't shock. It was calculation. You see, filing false reports to federal agencies is a serious crime, and Isabella was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The woman behind the badge. Let me tell you about myself first. I've been working in banking compliance for 12 years, specializing in federal regulations and reporting requirements. My job involves ensuring our bank follows every single rule laid out by agencies like the OCC, FDIC, and yes, even ICE when it comes to customer verification. I know federal law like the back of my hand, and I certainly know what constitutes filing a false report to a federal agency. I met my husband, David Martinez, 3 years ago at a banking conference in Austin. He worked in commercial lending for a competing bank, and we bonded over our shared frustration with constantly changing federal regulations. David was handsome, intelligent, and seemed to respect my career achievements. We married after a year-long engagement in what I thought was a beautiful ceremony at the San Antonio Cathedral. The problems with his mother started immediately. Isabella Martinez had emigrated from Guadalajara in 1978 and became a naturalized citizen in 1985. She'd worked hard, raised 3 children as a single mother, and built a successful catering business. I respected her story and initially tried to bond with her over our shared Mexican heritage. But Isabella had other plans. From day one, she made it clear that I wasn't good enough for her son. According to her, I was too career-focused, too American, and didn't know how to be a proper Mexican wife. She'd make pointed comments about how I should quit my job to have babies, how my Spanish wasn't authentic enough, and how women from good families didn't work in banks. They worked in their husbands' businesses. The situation got progressively worse over our 2-year marriage. Isabella had keys to our house. David had given them to her for emergencies, and she'd show up unannounced to check on things. She'd rearrange my furniture, throw away my mail if it looked too official, and once even tried to redecorate our bedroom while I was at work. But the comments about my citizenship status started about 6 months ago. It began subtly. She'd make jokes about how I looked like those girls on the news getting deported. She'd ask loudly in restaurants if I had papers when the server was nearby. Once, at a family barbecue, she announced to everyone that she was surprised immigration hadn't caught up with me yet. David, to his credit, would tell her to stop. But never firmly, never with any real authority. It was always, "Mom, come on," or "Mom, that's not funny." Never, "Mom, my wife is a natural-born American citizen, and if you can't respect that, you're not welcome in our home." The final straw came on Tuesday, March 15th, at exactly 2:17 p.m. I'd come home early from work due to a migraine. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed Isabella's old Buick parked on the street. This wasn't unusual. She had those keys after all. What was unusual was seeing her through our kitchen window, sitting at our table, going through what looked like a stack of papers. I entered quietly through the front door and heard her on the phone in the kitchen. She was speaking to someone named Patricia about how she'd found proof that I was illegal and how she was going to handle this once and for all. The discovery, I stood in the hallway, listening as Isabella rifled through my personal documents. She'd gone into our home office and removed files from my desk. Files that included my birth certificate, social security card, passport, and banking compliance certifications. "Patricia, I'm telling you, these documents are fake," she was saying. No real American has a name like Monica Rivera. And look at this. She works at a bank. They must not be doing proper background checks. That's when I realized Isabella wasn't just racist. She was genuinely delusional. In her mind, she'd constructed an elaborate fantasy where I was some kind of dangerous criminal who had somehow fooled everyone, including federal background investigators, who'd cleared me for my banking position. I quietly retrieved my phone and started recording as I walked into the kitchen. Isabella, I said calmly, what are you doing with my documents? She looked up like a deer in headlights, then quickly composed herself into righteous anger. I'm protecting my son, she declared. And I'm protecting America. You think you can. Fool everyone with these fake papers, but I know what you really are. What am I, Isabella? You're an illegal, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it. That's when she stood up, pointed that finger at me, and delivered the line I opened this story with. And that's when she pulled out her phone and called ICE. The phone call that changed everything. I stood there, still recording, as Isabella spoke to what she believed was an ICE agent. In reality, she'd called the general information line and was speaking to a receptionist, but she was treating it like she was reporting the crime of the century. Yes, hello, I want to report an illegal immigrant, she said in her heavily accented English. She's living in my son's house and working at a bank with fake documents. Her name is Monica Rivera, and she lives at 4237 Oak Creek Drive in Houston, Texas. The poor receptionist was apparently trying to redirect her to the proper reporting channels, but Isabella kept interrupting. No, you don't understand. This is urgent. She has access to bank information. She could be stealing money and sending it back to Mexico. I have proof right here that her documents are fake. I watched this woman, who had herself immigrated to this country, try to weaponize the immigration system against her own daughter-in-law based on nothing but racism and paranoia. And I watched her commit what I knew was a federal crime in the process. After she hung up, she turned to me with a satisfied smile. There, she said. Now we'll see who you really are. When they come to arrest you, David will finally understand that I was protecting him. Isabella, I said quietly, do you know what the penalty is for filing a false report to a federal agency? Her smile faltered slightly. It's not false. You're illegal. I walked over to the kitchen counter where she'd spread out my documents and picked up my birth certificate, the official one issued by Harris County, Texas, showing I was born at Methodist Hospital on September 3rd, 1989. This is my birth certificate, I said, holding it up to my phone camera, which was still recording. Issued by Harris County, Texas. Would you like to read the hospital name out loud? The education of Isabella Martinez. What happened next was almost comical, if it weren't so infuriating. Isabella grabbed the birth certificate from my hands and examined it like she was some kind of forensic expert. She held it up to the light, bent it slightly, even smelled it. This is fake, she announced. I can tell. How can you tell? Because real ones don't look like this. Isabella, what does your naturalization certificate look like? She paused. That's different. How is it different? Because I earned my citizenship? I came here legally and worked for it. I didn't just appear with fake documents. I realized at that moment that Isabella's delusion ran deeper than simple racism. She had convinced herself that anyone who shared her ethnicity but had been born here was somehow cheating, that they hadn't earned their citizenship the way she had. Isabella, I said, I'm going to call my husband and ask him to come home. I think we need to have a family conversation. Good, she said. Call him. When David sees what I found, he'll thank me for saving him from you. So I called David, and while we waited for him to arrive, Isabella continued her investigation of my documents, providing running commentary that I captured on video. Look at this passport, she said. Too new, real Americans don't travel much. Look at this social security card. The numbers don't look right. And this banking license, Monica Rivera? Please, that's not a real American name. By the time David arrived 30 minutes later, I had over an hour of recorded material of his mother accusing me of being an illegal immigrant, claiming my legitimate government documents were forged, and describing her phone call to ICE in detail. David's choice. When David walked into our kitchen and saw his mother going through our personal files, his face went white. "Mom, what are you doing here? And why do you have Monica's documents?" Isabella launched into her explanation, with the emphasis. I asked them of someone who believed they were saving the day. "David, mihijo, I have discovered something terrible. Your wife is not who she says she is. She's an illegal immigrant with fake documents, and she's been lying to you this whole time. But don't worry, I called immigration services and they're going to investigate." David looked at me, then back at his mother. "Mom, Monica was born in Houston. We've talked about this." No, Isabella said, waving my birth certificate in the air. "This is fake. Look at it. Real Americans don't have names like Monica Rivera." "Mom," David started. "And she works at a bank. Don't you see? She's probably stealing money and sending it back to Mexico. Why else would they hire someone like her for such an important job?" That's when I saw something shift in David's expression. For 2 years, he'd been making excuses for his mother's behavior, chalking it up to generational differences or cultural misunderstandings. But hearing her suggest that his wife was a criminal, based on nothing but her name and appearance, seemed to wake him up to what I'd been dealing with. "Mom," he said, his voice getting firmer, "Monica is not illegal. She was born here. Her birth certificate is real. And she works at the bank because she has a master's degree in finance and 12 years of experience in compliance." "David, you're being naive," Isabella said. "These people are very good at making fake documents." "These people?" David repeated. "You know what I mean." The point of no return. That phrase, "these people," seemed to be David's breaking point. "Mom, I need you to leave," he said quietly. "What?" "I need you to leave our house right now, and I need you to give me back the keys." Isabella looked stunned. "David, I'm trying to protect you." "From what, Mom?" "From my wife who was born in the same city where you became a citizen, from the woman who has security clearance to work with federal banking regulations, from someone whose family has been in Texas longer than ours has been in America." "But David..." "No, Mom, I've heard enough. Monica, can you show me your birth certificate?" I handed him the document that his mother had been examining. He looked at it, then looked at her. "Mom, this is a real birth certificate issued by Harris County Methodist Hospital, September 3rd, 1989. What part of this looks fake to you?" Isabella was starting to realize that her plan was backfiring, but she doubled down. "The whole thing looks fake. And even if it's not, she's still not right for you. A proper Mexican wife wouldn't work at a bank. She'd be home having babies and cooking for her husband." "Mom, give me the keys to our house. David, give me the keys, Mom. Now." Reluctantly, Isabella removed our house keys from her keychain and placed them on the kitchen table. "You're making a mistake," she said. "When immigration comes to investigate, you'll see that I was right." After she left, David and I sat at our kitchen table in silence for several minutes. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "For what?" "For not stopping this sooner. For making excuses for her behavior. For letting it get this far." "David," I said gently, "there's something else you need to know." The federal crime. I showed David my phone and explained that I'd recorded the entire incident, including his mother's call to ICE. "She filed a false report to a federal agency," I explained. "She knowingly provided false information to immigration services, claiming I was in the country illegally when she had access to documents proving otherwise." David's face went pale. "What does that mean?" "It means she committed a federal crime. Filing a false report to ICE carries penalties of up to 6 months in federal prison and fines up to $10,000. Are you going to... what are you planning to do?" I looked at my husband, this man I'd loved and married, whose mother had just tried to have me deported from my own country of birth, and I realized that this was a defining moment in our marriage. "David, your mother didn't just insult me today. She didn't just invade our privacy or disrespect our marriage. She attempted to use federal law enforcement to harm me based on nothing but racial prejudice. She tried to weaponize the immigration system against a natural-born American citizen, and she did it using information she obtained by illegally entering our home. I understand that, But do you? Because if I don't report this, what message does that send? That it's okay to file false immigration reports as long as you're someone's mother-in-law? That racism is acceptable as long as it's family? David was quiet for a long time. Finally, he asked, "What would happen if you reported it?" ICE would investigate. They'd quickly determine that her report was false. It would take them about 5 minutes to verify that I'm a natural-born citizen. Then they'd refer the case to the U.S. Attorney's Office for prosecution of filing a false report. And then your mother would be arrested, charged with a federal crime, and most likely convicted based on the evidence I have of her making the report. David put his head in his hands. She's my mother, Monica. I know. And I'm your wife. The decision. I gave David 24 hours to think about it. I told him that I needed to see some kind of real accountability for what his mother had done, and that if he couldn't support me in seeking that accountability, then we had bigger problems than just an overbearing mother-in-law. During those 24 hours, something interesting happened. ICE actually followed up on Isabella's report. At 10:15 a.m. on Wednesday morning, I received a phone call on my work line from Agent Jennifer Walsh with ICE Homeland Security Investigations. Ms. Rivera, we received a report claiming you're unlawfully present in the United States and working with fraudulent documents. I need to ask you a few questions to clear this matter up. Of course, Agent Walsh. I should mention that I believe this report was filed maliciously by my mother-in-law, who knows I'm a natural-born citizen. There was a pause. Ma'am, are you saying someone knowingly filed a false report? Yes, Agent Walsh. I have video and audio recordings of her making the report while looking at my birth certificate issued by Harris County, Texas. Another pause. Ms. Rivera, would you be available to come in for an interview this afternoon? And please bring those recordings. The federal investigation at 3:00 p.m. That Wednesday, I sat in a sterile conference room at the ICE field office in Houston, across from Agent Walsh and her supervisor, Agent Rodriguez. I'd brought my birth certificate, passport, social security card, and banking compliance credentials, along with my phone containing the recordings of Isabella. Ms. Rivera, Agent Walsh began, we've already verified your citizenship status through multiple databases. You are indeed a natural-born U.S. citizen, and all of your documents are legitimate. The report filed against you appears to be completely false. Yes, ma'am. Can you walk us through what happened yesterday? I played the recordings for them, starting with Isabella going through my documents, her phone call to ICE, and her continued insistence that my documents were fake even after being shown my birth certificate. Agent Rodriguez took notes throughout the playback. When it finished, he looked up at me. Ms. Rivera, in your professional opinion as a banking compliance officer, do you believe the person who made this report knew it was false when she filed it? Yes, Agent Rodriguez. She was holding my birth certificate in her hands while making the call. She had access to all of my legitimate government-issued documents. There's no way she could have reasonably believed I was in the country unlawfully. And what was her stated motivation for making this report? I played another section of the recording where Isabella explained to David that she was protecting him from me and that people with names like Monica Rivera weren't real Americans. Agent Walsh and Agent Rodriguez exchanged looks. Ms. Rivera, Agent Walsh said, "We'd like to interview your mother-in-law. Would you be willing to assist us in setting up that interview?" Of course. And just so you're aware, filing a false report to ICE is a federal crime punishable by up to 6 months in prison and fines up to $10,000. If we determine that this report was knowingly false, we'll be referring the case to the U.S. Attorney's Office for prosecution. The trap. When I got home that evening, David was waiting for me with a somber expression. How did it go? He asked. I told him about my interview with ICE, about their verification of my citizenship, and about their intention to interview his mother regarding her false report. Monica, he said, I've been thinking about this all day, and I need to ask you something. What? Is there any way we can handle this without involving federal prosecutors? I mean, couldn't you just explain to them that it was a misunderstanding? That my mother is just old and confused? I stared at my husband. After everything we'd been through, after listening to the recordings of his mother calling me a criminal and trying to have me deported, he was asking me to protect her from the consequences of her actions. David, I said carefully, Your mother isn't confused. She's a successful businesswoman who immigrated here herself and understands exactly how the system works. She knowingly filed a false report to harm me because she doesn't think people who look like me belong in this country, even when we were born here. But prison time and $10,000 fine? Don't you think that's excessive? That's when I realized that David still didn't get it. He still saw this as a family dispute rather than what it actually was, a federal crime motivated by racial prejudice. David, I said, what do you think would happen to me if I filed a false report claiming that one of my banking clients was engaged in money laundering when I knew they weren't? He was quiet. I'd be fired, prosecuted, and probably sent to federal prison. And I'd deserve it, because making false reports to federal agencies is a serious crime that wastes resources and can destroy innocent people's lives. But this is different. How is it different? Because she's family. And that makes filing false federal reports okay? David didn't have an answer for that. The next morning, Agent Walsh called me. Ms. Rivera, we'd like to interview Mrs. Martinez. This afternoon. Could you help us arrange that? I called Isabella and told her that Immigration Services needed to follow up on her report and wanted to meet with her. Good, she said. I told you they'd take this seriously. When they see those fake documents, they'll arrest her immediately. They want to meet at the ICE office on Greenspoint Drive at 2 p.m. today. I'll be there, and I'm bringing those documents as evidence. What Isabella didn't realize was that she was walking into a federal investigation of herself. The UN interview I wasn't present for Isabella's interview with ICE, but Agent Walsh called me that evening to give me an update. Ms. Rivera, your mother-in-law insisted throughout the interview that you are illegally present in the United States, despite being shown evidence of your citizenship. When we asked her why she believed your birth certificate was fraudulent, she stated that people with names like Monica Rivera aren't real Americans. What did she say when you told her that you'd verified my citizenship? She claimed we were part of a conspiracy to help you maintain your illegal status. She also suggested that your position at the bank was obtained through fraudulent means and recommended that we investigate your employer for hiring practices. Was stunned. Even when confronted by federal agents with proof that her report was false, Isabella was doubling down. Agent Walsh, what happens now? We're referring this case to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Mrs. Martinez clearly knew her report was false when she filed it, and she's shown no remorse or acknowledgement of wrongdoing. In fact, she's now accused federal agents of being part of a conspiracy, which suggests she might file additional false reports if not prosecuted. Will I need to testify? Possibly, but the recordings you provided are quite clear. We have her on tape filing a false report while looking at legitimate documents proving your citizenship. It's a fairly straightforward case. The indictment 3. Weeks later, Isabella Martinez was indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of filing a false report to a federal agency. The indictment specifically mentioned that she had made the report knowing it to be false and with intent to harm the subject of the report based on racial and ethnic prejudice. When David told me about the indictment, he was upset. Monica, this has gone too far. My mother could go to prison. Yes, I said. She could, because she committed a federal crime. But can't you ask them to drop the charges? Can't you tell them you don't want to prosecute? David, this isn't a civil matter. When someone commits a federal crime, it's not up to the victim whether prosecution moves forward. It's up to the federal government, and they've decided that. Your mother's actions warrant prosecution. Then can't you at least testify on her behalf? Tell them she's not a bad person, just confused? I looked at my husband and realized that he was never going to understand the seriousness of what his mother had done. To him, this would always be a family squabble that I was escalating unnecessarily. David, I said, your mother tried to have me deported from my own country of birth. She filed a false federal report accusing me of being a criminal. She did this based purely on racial prejudice, and when federal agents proved her wrong, she accused them of being part of a conspiracy. She's not confused. She's a racist who weaponized federal law enforcement against her own daughter-in-law. So you're going to let her go to prison? I'm going to tell the truth about what she did. That's my only obligation here. The plea hearing, Isabella's attorney convinced her to accept a plea deal rather than go to trial. She would plead guilty to filing a false report to a federal agency in exchange for the recommended sentence of 6 months in federal prison and a $10,000 fine. The plea hearing was scheduled for Thursday, April 27th at 9 a.m. in federal court. David asked me to attend with him to support his mother. Support her how? I asked. Just be there. Show the judge that there are no hard feelings. David, there are hard feelings. Your mother tried to have me deported. But you could show mercy. You could demonstrate forgiveness. I thought about it for several days. Finally, I agreed to attend the hearing, not to support Isabella, but to make sure the judge understood the full impact of her actions. When we arrived at the federal courthouse that Thursday morning, Isabella was already there with her attorney. She looked smaller than I remembered, and older. When she saw me, her expression was unreadable. During the hearing, the prosecutor read the details of Isabella's crime into the record. Your Honor, on March 15, 2023, Mrs. Martinez contacted Immigration and Customs Enforcement and reported that her daughter-in-law, Monica Rivera, was illegally present in the United States and working with fraudulent documents. At the time she made this report, Mrs. Martinez was in possession of Mrs. Rivera's birth certificate, which clearly showed that Mrs. Rivera was born in Houston, Texas. Mrs. Martinez made this report despite knowing it to be false and with the intent to harm Mrs. Rivera based on racial and ethnic prejudice. The judge asked Isabella if she understood the charges and if her plea was voluntary. She answered yes to both questions. Then the judge asked if anyone had any statements to make before sentencing. Isabella's attorney stood up. Your Honor, my client is a 67-year-old woman who came to this country as a young adult and has been a productive member of society for over 40 years. She built a successful business, raised 3 children, and has no prior criminal record. This incident was an aberration, and she deeply regrets her actions. The prosecutor then stood. Your Honor, while Mrs. Martinez may have no prior record, her actions in this case were particularly egregious. She attempted to weaponize federal law enforcement against a natural-born American citizen based purely on ethnic prejudice. When confronted with evidence that her report was false, she doubled down and accused federal agents of being part of a conspiracy. This suggests a complete lack of remorse and a likelihood of reoffending. Then the judge looked at me. Mrs. Rivera, would you like to make a statement? My statement to the court, I stood up and looked at Isabella, then at the judge. Your Honor, my name is Monica Rivera. I'm 34 years old and I was born at Methodist Hospital here in Houston. I work as a senior compliance officer for First National Bank, where part of my job involves ensuring we follow federal regulations properly. Mrs. Martinez didn't just file a false report about me, Your Honor. She tried to use the federal immigration system as a weapon against someone she knew was a natural-born citizen. She did this not because she had any genuine belief that I had violated immigration law, but because she didn't think someone with my name and appearance deserved to be considered an American. As someone who works in federal compliance, I understand how serious false reporting is. When people file false reports, it wastes federal resources, undermines legitimate investigations, and can destroy innocent people's lives and careers. Mrs. Martinez didn't care about any of that. She was willing to damage the integrity of our immigration system just to satisfy her personal prejudices. Your Honor, Mrs. Martinez immigrated to this country and earned her citizenship through hard work and legal processes. She should understand better than anyone how precious citizenship is and how harmful it is to make false accusations about someone's immigration status. The fact that she would do this to another person, especially someone she knew was innocent, shows a complete disrespect for the legal system that welcomed her and gave her opportunities. I don't take any pleasure in seeing her face criminal consequences. But I think it's important that people understand that filing false reports to federal agencies is a serious crime with serious penalties, regardless of your motivation or your relationship to the person you're targeting. Thank you, Your Honor. The judge thanked me and then addressed Isabella directly. Mrs. Martinez, do you have anything you'd like to say? Isabella stood up slowly and spoke in a quiet voice. Your Honor, I was trying to protect my son. I believed... She trailed off, apparently realizing that any explanation would only make things worse. I'm sorry, she finally said. I made a mistake. Start the sentence. The judge sentenced Isabella Martinez to exactly what the plea agreement specified: 6 months in federal prison and a $10,000 fine. She would also be on supervised probation for 2 years after her release. Mrs. Martinez, the judge said, you immigrated to this country and built a life here through legal means. You should understand better than most people how our immigration system works and why false reports undermine that system. Your actions were not just illegal, they were a betrayal of the values that this country is supposed to represent. Mrs. Rivera was born in this country and has every right to be here. Your attempt to use federal law enforcement to harm her based on ethnic prejudice is exactly the kind of behavior that our laws are designed to prevent and punish. I'm sentencing you to 6 months in federal prison followed by 2 years of supervised probation. You'll also pay a fine of $10,000 and perform 200 hours of community service with an immigrant services organization, so you can better understand the real challenges that immigrants face. I hope this experience teaches you that citizenship, whether by birth or naturalization, is something to be respected, not weaponized against people you don't like. Isabella was remanded into custody immediately. As the bailiffs led her away, she looked back at David with tears in her eyes. She didn't look at me at all. The aftermath, David and I drove home from the courthouse in silence. When we got to our house, he went straight to our bedroom and closed the door. I found him there an hour later, sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. She's going to federal prison, he said. Yes. Because of you. No, David. Because of what she chose to do. He looked up at me with red eyes. You could have stopped this at any point. You could have asked them not to prosecute. You could have told the judge you forgave her. David, your mother committed a federal crime. When I took that oath as a bank compliance officer, I swore to uphold federal law. How could I ask federal prosecutors to ignore a crime just because it was committed by my mother-in-law? Because she's family. Because people make mistakes. Filing a false federal report isn't a mistake, David. It's a deliberate criminal act. And your mother didn't just do it once. She doubled down when federal agents proved her wrong. David was quiet for several minutes. Then he said, I don't think I can forgive you for this. For what? For being the victim of a federal crime? For telling the truth about what happened? For not showing mercy? For not protecting my mom? David, I spent 2 years trying to build a relationship with your mother while she insulted me, invaded our privacy, and questioned my right to exist in my own country. Where was your protection then? That was different. How was it different? Because she wasn't facing prison time then. I realized at that moment that David and I had fundamentally different values. He believed that family loyalty should supersede the law. I believed that no one was above the law, including his mother. David, I said gently, if your mother had called the police and falsely reported that I had robbed a bank, would you expect me to ask them not to prosecute her for filing a false police report? That's different. How? Because he couldn't finish the sentence because there was no meaningful difference. False reports to federal agencies are crimes, regardless of which agency receives the report or what the family relationship is. The divorce. 6 months later, David filed for divorce. He claimed that he could never trust me again after I destroyed his family by refusing to show mercy to his mother. He wanted half of our house, half of my retirement savings, and alimony. I hired Patricia Coleman, one of the best family law attorneys in Houston. During our initial consultation, I showed her all of my documentation related to Isabella's case, including the recordings and court records. Monica, she said, your husband is claiming that you maliciously prosecuted his mother, but federal crimes aren't prosecuted by private parties. They're prosecuted by the government. You were the victim, not the prosecutor. That's what I tried to explain to him. And he's asking for alimony from someone who was the victim of a federal crime committed by his own mother. That's unusual. During the divorce proceedings, David's attorney tried to argue that I had vindictively pursued criminal charges against Isabella. My attorney responded by pointing out that victims don't get to decide whether federal crimes are prosecuted. That's up to federal prosecutors. The judge in our divorce case had clearly read the criminal case file. Mr. Martinez, she said during one hearing. Your mother filed a false report to federal immigration authorities about your wife, who is a natural-born American citizen. Your wife didn't decide to prosecute. The federal government did because filing false reports to federal agencies is a serious crime that wastes resources and can harm innocent people. But she could have asked them not to prosecute, David's attorney argued. No, the judge responded, she couldn't have. Federal prosecutors don't drop cases because victims ask them to. They drop cases when they don't think they can prove guilt, beyond a reasonable doubt. In this case, they had recorded evidence of Mrs. Martinez committing the crime. The divorce was finalized on December 15th. David got half the value of our house, but no alimony. The judge ruled that his request for spousal support was inappropriate under the circumstances, given that he was asking for financial support from someone his own mother had tried to harm through false federal reporting. Isabella's release. Isabella served her full 6-month sentence at the Federal Medical Center in Fort Worth. When she was released, she moved in with David, who had purchased a small townhouse with his share of our divorce settlement. I heard through mutual friends that Isabella had completed her community service at a refugee resettlement organization, where she helped newly arrived immigrants navigate the legal immigration system. Several people told me that the experience seemed to change her perspective significantly. About a year after her release, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from Isabella. Monica, it said, I understand if you never want to hear from me again, but I need to tell you that I was wrong about everything. Working with real immigrants and refugees showed me how difficult and dangerous the immigration process actually is and how harmful false reports can be. I realized that I was so focused on the idea that I had earned my citizenship through struggle that I resented people who were born with what I had to work for. That was wrong, and it was stupid. You didn't choose where you were born anymore than I did. I also realized that I was threatened by your success and education, and I used your ethnicity as an excuse to tear you down. That was racist, and it was cruel. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I understand now what I did to you, and I'm deeply sorry. You deserved better from me, and David should have protected you instead of making excuses for my behavior. I hope you're happy and successful. You always deserved that. Isabella. Moving forward. I never responded to Isabella's letter, but I kept it. Not because I forgave her, I'm still working on that, but because it represented something important: accountability. Isabella had spent 6 months in federal prison and 2 years on probation thinking about what she'd done. She'd been required to work with real immigrants facing real challenges, and eventually she'd come to understand that her actions weren't just illegal, they were morally wrong. The experience taught me several important lessons. First, documentation is everything. If I hadn't recorded Isabella's call to ICE and her continued insistence that my documents were fake, it would have been very difficult to prove that she'd knowingly filed a false report. Second, federal law enforcement takes false reports seriously, especially when they're motivated by bias. ICE investigators didn't just brush this off as a family dispute. They recognized it as a waste of federal resources and a potential hate crime. Third, sometimes the people closest to us will disappoint us in the most profound ways. David's inability to support me when his mother committed a federal crime against me showed me that our marriage was built on a foundation that couldn't withstand real adversity. But most importantly, I learned that standing up for what's right isn't always easy or popular, but it's always necessary. Isabella's actions weren't just crimes against me. They were attacks on the integrity of our immigration system and our national values of equality and due process. My new life today: I'm 36 years old and work as a vice president of compliance for Texas Community Bank. I live in a beautiful condo in downtown Houston with a view of the city where I was born and raised. I'm dating a wonderful man named Carlos who's a federal prosecutor. Coincidentally, he works in the same U.S. Attorney's Office that prosecuted Isabella, though he wasn't involved in her case. Carlos immigrated from El Salvador when he was 8 years old and became a naturalized citizen when he was 18. He earned his law degree from the University of Texas and has spent his career prosecuting federal crimes. When I told him my story, his response was exactly what I needed to hear. "You did the right thing," he said. False reports to federal agencies undermine the entire system and harm innocent people. If we don't prosecute crimes like this, we're telling people that the law doesn't matter, as long as you claim family loyalty as your motivation. I still live in Houston, still work in banking compliance, and I'm still proud to be a natural-born American citizen whose family has deep roots in Texas. But now I also know what it feels like to have my citizenship questioned, my documents called fake, and my right to exist in my own country challenged by someone who should have welcomed me as family. Isabella served her time and paid her fine. David moved on with his life and eventually remarried. And I learned that sometimes the most important battles aren't the ones we choose. They're the ones that choose us. The immigration system isn't perfect, but it's built on the principle that citizenship, whether by birth or naturalization, is sacred and shouldn't be weaponized against people we don't like. When Isabella tried to use ICE as her personal enforcement mechanism against me, she attacked that principle. And now she knows that actions have consequences, even when you're just trying to protect your son, especially then. Monica Rivera lives and works in Houston, Texas. She specializes in federal banking compliance and serves as a volunteer with local immigrant rights organizations. She believes that citizenship is a responsibility, not just a privilege, and that protecting the integrity of our legal systems benefits everyone. Final note. Filing false reports to federal agencies is a serious crime. If you believe someone has violated immigration law, there are proper channels for reporting those concerns. But make sure you have legitimate evidence and genuine belief that a crime has occurred. Otherwise, you might find yourself facing the same charges that Isabella Martinez did. And remember, someone's name, appearance, or accent doesn't determine their citizenship status. Only proper documentation can do that. Before you make assumptions about someone's right to be in America, ask yourself if you'd want those same assumptions made about you or your family members. Because in America, we're all immigrants or descendants of immigrants, except for Native Americans who were here first. And the strength of our country comes from that diversity, not from tearing each other down based on prejudice and fear. Justice isn't always comfortable, but it's always necessary. Fear. Justice isn't always comfortable, but it's always necessary.